Pamela Cross snatched the $5 million check out of Julian Hayes' hand and tore it in half in front of his 8-year-old daughter. "Men like you don't walk in here with money like this," she sneered, looking him up and down like something she'd scraped off her shoe. Then she called the police to report fraud. Julian pulled Sophie close and told Pamela calmly that she had just made the most expensive mistake of her career. As the guard moved to drag him toward the door, Pamela's boss walked in, saw the shredded paper on the floor, and went pale. "Mr. Hayes," he said. "Sir, are you all right?" And nobody in that lobby understood why. The coat had lasted 11 winters, and Julian Hayes had stopped noticing the frayed cuff sometime around the 4th. It hung on the hook by the back door of a 2-bedroom house on Larkin Street in a town called Maple Hollow, where the same 400 families had been buying gas at the same station since before he arrived, and where nobody had ever asked him what he did for a living beyond the answer he always gave, which was that he worked with numbers. He was 42. He had been raising Sophie alone for 6 years, long enough that the arithmetic of it had stopped feeling like grief and started feeling like weather. The 6 o'clock alarm, the lunchbox with the cracked lid. She refused to let him replace the 12-minute drive to Maple Hollow Elementary in a sedan with 190,000 miles on it and a passenger window that only rolled down 2/3 of the way. Sophie was 8. She had opinions about most things, and one was that the car was fine. "It has character," she said one morning, buckling herself in. "It has a smell," Julian said. "That's the character." He drove her to school. He drove her home. On the days he had calls, he took them in the back bedroom with the door shut, and Sophie understood only that her father talked to people who seemed to be in a hurry. What she did not understand, what nobody in Maple Hollow understood, was that when those calls ended, decisions had been made about pension funds in 4 states and a portfolio that had crossed $9 billion in the spring. Hayes Capital Group had an office in Boston with 31 employees and a lobby Julian had visited fewer than a dozen times in 3 years. He ran it the way some men run a farm from a truck remotely constantly, and without ever once putting his name on a building. That was deliberate. He had grown up watching what money did to the children of the men his father drove, for the way it installed a certain look in their faces by the age of 10, a small, permanent expectation that rooms would rearrange themselves on arrival. He had promised himself before Sophie could walk that she would not learn that look, that she would grow up believing a person's worth was built rather than inherited. So he kept 2 lives, and he kept them clean. The corporate accounts, the wire authorities, the compliance filings, all of that lived in Boston behind a wall of attorneys. His personal money lived where it had lived since he was 27 and had nothing. A checking account at Holstead National, opened 15 years earlier in a town he no longer lived in, maintained since almost entirely through a phone app. He had not stood inside a Holstead branch in years, which was how on a Thursday in early October he came to be standing in one. The envelope had arrived Monday. Inside it was a check for $5 million drawn on the escrow account of a firm in Palo Alto, made out to Julian T. Hayes, the proceeds of a personal stake he had taken in a logistics software company 9 years earlier, back when it was 4 engineers and a rented server. Not a Hayes Capital position, his own money from his own pocket from a bet he had made with savings. He had tried to deposit it from the kitchen table Monday night, holding the phone above the paper, while Sophie ate cereal. The app thought about it and then declined politely, the way software declines things amounts above the mobile limit require an in-branch visit. Thursday was an in-service day at Maple Hollow Elementary, which was the only reason Sophie was in the car at all. He put on the coat and told her there would be ice cream afterward and drove 14 miles to the Ellsworth branch on Commerce Street. He had a plan for the money, and he had made it in the same 20 minutes he'd made most of his important decisions, standing at the sink with the water running. Half would go into a trust Sophie would not be able to touch until she was 25 and would not be told about until she was 18. The other half would start something, a scholarship fund for kids being raised by one parent, the kind of kids whose applications got read after the ones with 2 signatures on them. He had already written the first line of the charter on the back of a grocery receipt. He had not thought further than that. "Is it a lot?" Sophie asked in the parking lot, looking at the envelope on the dashboard. "It's a number. That's not an answer." "It's the answer you get today," Julian said and unbuckled her. The Ellsworth branch had been remodeled the previous winter, and remodeled hard, the old teak counters gone, replaced with something pale and Scandinavian, and the staff replaced along with them. Holstead had folded 3 regional districts into one that February and pushed nearly the whole roster out the door. Of the 12 people who worked in that building, 10 had been there under a year. Chloe Bennett had been there 3 months. She was 24, still keeping a laminated card of procedure codes in her drawer, and still on that particular Thursday, arriving 40 minutes early because of what was written on the branch calendar in red. Douglas Kane, regional president, was scheduled to walk through Ellsworth at 11 o'clock. The whole building knew. Tyler Grant, the guard, a former Marine who had transferred in from Fairview 6 weeks earlier and still had not learned everyone's name, had been asked twice to move his stool out of the sightline from the entrance. Someone had wiped the door glass 3 separate times. There was a smell of window cleaner in the lobby that did not belong in a bank. At 9:40, Pamela Cross came out of the manager's office and stood at the head of the teller line with her arms folded. "I want to be very clear," she told them. "Mr. Kane will be here at 11. Nothing goes wrong before 11. Nothing goes wrong at 11. If you are unsure about a transaction, you do not improvise. You come to me." She looked down the line until each of them nodded. At 10:18, the door opened and a man in a worn canvas coat came in holding an envelope with a little girl in a purple jacket walking half a step ahead of him. There were 4 people ahead of them. Sophie counted the ceiling tiles, then the pins on the chains, then announced that the bank smelled like a hospital. Julian told her that was the cleaner. She asked if banks got sick. He said not usually. Chloe waved them up. "Morning," Julian said, sliding the envelope across. "Deposit into checking, please. It's over the app limit, so they told me to bring it in." He said it the way a man says a thing he considers boring. Chloe opened the envelope, unfolded the check, and read the amount, and Julian watched the color of her attention change, watched her eyes go to the number, then the payee line, then the number again. "Okay," she said. Her voice had gone careful. "Mr. Hayes, this is above what I can process at the window. I need my manager to look at it. That's procedure." "That's fine. It'll be a minute." "We've got a minute," Julian said. "We're getting ice cream after, so she'll tell you if it's longer." Sophie confirmed she would. Chloe went to the office door. Julian did not hear what she said, only the low 2-note sound of a question and an answer, and then Pamela Cross came out with the check in her hand and her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. She was somewhere in her 40s in a gray blazer with the particular walk of a person who has decided to be efficient about something unpleasant. She stopped 4 feet from the counter and looked at Julian. She looked at the coat first, then the boots, which had salt stains on them from the previous February, then back up to his face and then past him through the window to the sedan parked at the curb with the dented rear quarter panel. It took perhaps 2 seconds. Julian had spent 20 years in rooms where the whole outcome was decided in the first 2 seconds, and he knew exactly what he had just watched happen. She had not opened the folder yet. "Sir, Pamela said. "Where did you get this?" "I sold shares in a company. That's the escrow disbursement." "Which company?" "Meridian Freight Systems, Palo Alto." He set the folder on the counter and opened it himself, turning it so it faced her. "Driver's license, the transfer agreement executed and countersigned, cell number for the escrow officer, and she gave it to me precisely so it could be called from anywhere at any hour. And that account has been open under my name since 2010. Pamela did not look down at any of it. "Anyone can print an agreement." "Then call the number." "Do you have a business here in town, Mr. Hayes?" "I don't see how that's relevant to a deposit." "It's relevant," Pamela said, "when the amount doesn't match the customer." The lobby was not empty. There was a woman with a stroller by the brochure rack, 2 men waiting on the lone bench, an older couple at the second window. Pamela had not lowered her voice for any of them, and Julian understood with a clarity that arrived like cold air that she was not going to. He felt Sophie's hand find his and close around 2 of his fingers. She had gone very quiet. She was looking up at the woman behind the counter with her forehead creased in the way of a child who has just realized that an adult is angry and cannot work out what for. And Julian Hayes stood there with his hand in his daughter's hand and did the arithmetic he had done 100 times in his life and never once out loud. He could end this in 3 seconds. 2 words, 1 phone call, and every person in this building would be on the other side of the counter apologizing. The name existed. It was his. It was sitting there in his mouth like a stone. But the moment he said it, Sophie would hear it. And after that, she would be a girl who had watched a room change shape around her father's name, and she would never again not know that rooms could do that. He had 6 years of not saying it. He had a rule, and the rule was the whole point. "Ma'am," Julian said evenly, "I'd like you to make the call." Pamela Cross did not make the call. She set the folder down on the counter, not roughly, which would have been an act, but flatly, the way a person sets down something they have finished considering, and turned her head toward the teller line. "Marcus, Denise, come here a moment." Two of them came, a young man from the second window and a woman who had been counting a strap of 20s, the way employees come when a manager has used their names in that particular register. Pamela positioned them at her shoulder like a pair of parentheses. "I want witnesses to this conversation," she said. "Witnesses to a deposit," Julian said. "Witnesses to an attempted deposit." She raised her voice by perhaps 10%, which in a room that size was enough. "Sir, you've presented a check for $5 million. $5 million. Do you understand the position that puts this branch in?" "I understand it puts you in the position of picking up a telephone." "It puts me in the position of protecting my institution." She tapped one finger on the folder without opening it. "You've given me a printout and a license. I can produce a printout in 90 seconds on the machine behind me. What I don't have is anything connecting a man who drove up in that vehicle to a technology sale in California." The woman with the stroller had stopped pretending to read brochures. The two men on the loan bench had gone, still in the way of men who do not want to be involved and do not intend to leave. Julian kept his voice exactly where it had been. "The account's 15 years old. Pull the history. You'll see 15 years of a person who has never bounced anything. An old account can be compromised." Then the person compromising it picked a very strange way to profit by walking into a branch in the middle of a Thursday morning with a child and asking you to verify the funds. Something moved behind Pamela's face at that, and Julian saw it and understood it. She had already committed. She had committed in the 2 seconds by the window, and every sentence since had been the work of a person building a floor underneath a step she had already taken. "I'd suggest," she said, "that you go home. Get whatever documentation you actually have. Bring it back when you can support the claim." "I did bring it." "Then bring more." There was a small sound to Julian's left, the two-tone chime of a phone camera starting. He did not turn. He had been photographed by a stranger exactly once in his adult life at a conference in Chicago, and this was worse because there was a hand in his hand. "Daddy." Sophie's voice was very small and pitched for him alone. "Did we do something wrong?" He crouched without hurry because Hurry would have told her something and put himself at her eye level with his back half turned to the counter. "No," he said. "Nobody here did anything wrong. There's a lady who has to check something, and she's being very careful. That's her job. We're going to stand here and let her be careful. She's using her loud voice." "Some people's careful voice is loud." Sophie considered that with the seriousness she brought to most things. "Are we still getting ice cream?" "We are absolutely still getting ice cream." He straightened. Behind the counter, Chloe Bennett had not moved, and her face had gone the color of the wall. She had the laminated card of procedure codes out of the drawer and flat in front of her, and her eyes kept going to it, and Julian understood she was reading a line about escalation and verification and that she was 24 and had been in the building 3 months. "Ms. Cross," Chloe said, "the escrow number's right there. It'd take 2 minutes to—" Chloe," Pamela did not look at her. "Serve your line." There were 4 people in Chloe's line now. She served them. 22 minutes had gone by. Julian looked at the clock over the door, 20 of 11, and thought about the fact that a woman in Palo Alto was about to start her day 2,900 miles away with a phone in her pocket that would take her 90 seconds to answer, and that the entire distance between this moment and that one was a call that a person had decided not to make. Pamela pulled the check out of the folder. She held it up at eye level between 2 fingers angled so the light caught it, and she looked at it the way a person looks at a counterfeit bill they have already decided is counterfeit. "There's no watermark consistent with a disbursement instrument of this size," she said. "There is. It's on the left third. You have to tilt it." "I've tilted it." "You've held it." Pamela turned it once quickly and set it back down. "Sir, I've worked in this industry for 19 years. Then in 19 years, you've had access to a telephone." That was the first thing he had said with an edge on it, and he regretted it immediately because he saw what it did. Her chin came up. 19 years had a weight to it in her mouth. 19 years of this counter or one like it of being the person who said no, the last wall between an institution and its losses. Somewhere in those years was a story about a check she should have stopped and did not, and Julian could see its shadow standing behind her in the way she held her shoulders. "I'm going to be direct with you." Pamela said, because I don't think we're getting anywhere otherwise. Please. Men like you don't walk in here with money like this. The lobby heard it. All of it heard it. The older couple at the second window turned around fully. The phone that had chimed was up now unhidden, held at chest height by a man in a hardware store jacket who had come in to make a car payment. Julian felt the sentence land somewhere under his ribs and sit there. Say that again, he said. I said what I said. I want you to say it again in front of my daughter, and I want you to hear yourself do it. And Pamela Cross, who had 19 years and a red mark on the branch calendar and a regional president due in 20 minutes, took the check in both hands and tore it in half. The sound was very small. That was the thing Julian would remember afterward, that the tearing of $5 million made a noise no louder than a napkin. She tore it once and then, because half measures looked like uncertainty, put the halves together and tore them again and let the four pieces go from the height of her sternum so that they fell and skated apart across the pale new floor. Sophie made a sound. Not a word. The kind of small inhale a child makes when a glass breaks in the next room. That's a fraudulent instrument, Pamela said, and it's now out of circulation. The lobby had gone completely silent. Somewhere in the back, a printer that had been running stopped, and the absence of it was loud. Julian looked at the floor for 3 full seconds. Then he looked up and drew Sophie in against his hip, and when he spoke, there was nothing in his voice at all. You've just made the most expensive mistake of your career. Pamela's mouth opened. That's not a threat, Julian went on. You have destroyed a negotiable instrument belonging to a customer of this bank in front of a room full of witnesses and every camera on that ceiling. In about an hour, somebody is going to ask you to explain what happened here. I'd like you to have heard an accurate description of it at least once before you try. Pamela picked up the phone on the counter. Ellsworth Branch Commerce Street, she said into it. I have a fraud in progress. Male subject 40s attempted to negotiate a counterfeit instrument in excess of $5 million. He's still on the premises. He has a minor child with him. She listened and then said, Yes, please hurry, and hung up and looked past Julian toward the door. Tyler Grant had been standing at the end of the counter for 6 minutes with his hands loose at his sides and an expression getting harder to hold. He was 31. He had done 2 tours and come to Holstead because Fairview needed somebody, and it was 10 minutes from his mother's house. And in 6 weeks, nobody had asked him to do anything harder than reset the door magnet. Ma'am, escort him out. He can wait for the officers on the sidewalk. Tyler came forward. He came slowly. Sir, he said, I'm going to ask you to walk with me to the door. I know you are, Julian said. I'm not going to make that difficult for you. He bent and picked up his folder. He put his hand out for Sophie's. Chloe Bennett's voice came from behind the counter, high and unsteady, and much louder than she had meant it to be. Ms. Cross, that's not we're supposed to call the escrow agent before we... Chloe, if you say one more word, I will write you up before lunch. The girl's mouth closed. Julian took 2 steps toward the door with Tyler at his elbow, and Sophie moved with him, and that was when Pamela Cross said the sentence that changed the shape of the morning. The child stays. Everything in the lobby stopped. Excuse me, Julian said. The officers are going to want to talk to her, and frankly, I'm not comfortable with a man who's just attempted a $5 million fraud walking out of my building with a minor while the police are en route. She lifted her chin toward Tyler. Keep her here. Tyler did not move. Ma'am, I gave you an instruction. And Tyler Grant, 31 years old, 6 weeks into a job, 10 minutes from his mother's house with a manager's voice on him and a lobby watching, put out his hand toward the little girl in the purple jacket. He never touched her. Julian moved once, and it was not fast, and it was not violent, and it was the most complete motion anyone in that building had ever seen a man make. He stepped across, took Sophie by the shoulders, and set her behind him, not beside him, behind him, so that the whole of her was covered by the whole of him, and when he spoke, his voice had not risen at all. It had dropped. Nobody puts a hand on my daughter. The room did not breathe. You have made a series of choices this morning, Julian said. And I have let every single one of them stand because I have spent 6 years teaching that child that a person's name shouldn't change how a room treats them. That was my rule. It cost me something to keep it just now, and I kept it anyway. He reached into the inside pocket of the 11 winter coat where a playing card had been sitting since a Boston flight the previous spring, forgotten the way things are forgotten in a coat that is never emptied, and he took it out and set it face up on the counter in front of Pamela Cross. You've reached the end of it, he said. Hayes Capital. 2 words. Pamela looked down at the card. It was cream stock. There was no logo. There was a name and a Boston number, and underneath in type, no larger than the rest, the word founder. The front door opened. Douglas Kane came through at 8 minutes ahead of schedule with a district operations officer and 2 people from compliance walking behind him, and a coffee in his left hand mid-sentence saying something about queue times, and he got 4 steps into the lobby before he registered that nobody in it was moving. He stopped. His people stopped behind him. He looked at the guard with his hand still half raised at the woman behind the counter, at the child standing behind the legs of a man in a canvas coat with her fingers hooked into the back of his belt. Then he looked down at the floor where 4 pieces of pale green paper lay scattered across the new tile. Douglas Kane had been regional president for 4 years. For 2 months, he had been flying to Boston every other Tuesday to sit in a room with attorneys and a custody and servicing mandate worth $750 million, a mandate with 1 signature line left on it, and he had spent a great deal of those 2 months looking at the name printed above that line. He set his coffee down on the nearest desk without looking at the desk. He crossed the lobby and crouched a heavy man in a good suit, going down onto 1 knee on the floor of his own branch, and picked up the piece of paper nearest his shoe. He turned it over. It was the upper left quarter, and it carried the imprint of a firm in Palo Alto, and beneath it, the ruled line that begins "pay to the order of," and on that line, a name he had read 6 times that month in a Boston conference room. The color went out of his face in a way that people in that lobby would describe later, and not be able to describe well. He got up, still holding the piece of the check, and did not seem to know he was holding it. "Mr. Hayes," he said. Julian said nothing. Douglas Kane took 2 more steps and stopped at a distance that was without anyone deciding it respectful. "Sir, are you all right?" The word went through the room like a temperature change. Chloe Bennett's hand came up over her mouth. The man in the hardware store jacket lowered his phone an inch, and then, thinking better of it, raised it again. Marcus and Denise, the 2 parentheses, had somehow become 2 people standing very far apart. And Pamela Cross, who had been holding a posture for 34 minutes, watched her regional president kneel on the floor of her branch and stand up saying "sir" to a man in a coat with a frayed cuff, and something happened in her face that was not shame yet. It was arithmetic. It was a woman running numbers she did not have and getting an answer she could not read. "I'm fine," Julian said. "My daughter isn't." Kane turned his head very slightly toward Pamela without taking his eyes off Julian, and when he spoke, it was to the whole room. "Nobody leaves this branch." Julian looked down. Sophie had come out from behind him, not far, just to the side, still holding the back of his belt, and she was not looking at the torn paper or at the man in the suit or at the woman behind the counter. She was looking up at her father. She was looking at him the way a person looks at a stranger who has walked into their house wearing a familiar face, and Julian Hayes, who had built a rule around this exact second and defended it 6 years and given it up in one, felt the wind land in his hands and weigh nothing at all. Pamela came around the end of the counter fast. "Mr. Kane, before anything else, this individual has been uncooperative from the moment he walked in. He was disruptive. He raised his voice at my staff. I followed fraud protocol on a document that presented irregularly, and I have 19 years of—" "Ms. Cross." Kane's voice was very quiet. "You tore up a customer's check. I identified it as counterfeit. On what basis?" "On the basis of 19 years of judgment about who walks through that door." "Did you call the issuing escrow agent?" Pamela's mouth opened. "Did you call the number he gave you?" Kane said yes or no. There was no reason to dignify, "That's a no." She turned then and walked back behind the counter and sat down at her own terminal, and Julian watched her hands go to the keyboard. Chloe Bennett was closer. "Ms. Cross, don't." Pamela's fingers were already moving. There was an internal case note on the account opened at 10:26, saying in her own typing that the customer profile was inconsistent with the instrument and that the subject appeared to be laundering proceeds through a dormant retail account. She had the record open and the cursor in it. Chloe came down the line and put her hand flat on the desk beside the keyboard. "Miss Cross, stop, please. Get away from my terminal." "It won't work." Chloe's voice was shaking so badly it came out almost as a whisper, and then it steadied. Records retention had been the 3rd module of her onboarding 6 weeks ago, and she had taken notes, and the second half of her sentence came out clear enough for Kane to hear it from 8 feet away. "The note's already replicated to the central log. Every keystroke on that record is time-stamped, including the one you're making right now. And the lobby cameras have been running since 7. The room heard that, too." Kane crossed to the terminal, looked at the screen for perhaps 4 seconds, and said, "Step away from the desk." Pamela did not step away. "I did my job," she said. "You have no idea what it's like out here. 19 years and you people give me a fraud quota and a compliance score and a memo every quarter about losses, and the one time, step away from the desk." She stepped away. "Your access is suspended as of this moment," Kane said. "Your employment is terminated as of this moment. Denise, walk her to the office and stay in the room with her. Do not let her touch a terminal." The police came in at 11:04. There were 2 of them, and they had been dispatched to a fraud in progress with a minor present, and Julian understood before either of them opened their mouths that the call could not simply be waved off. A report had been made. A report existed. It had a number. So he stood in that lobby and gave a statement to a patrol officer while the district operations officer printed out 15 years of account history behind him, and Douglas Kane apologized twice in the middle of other people's sentences. It took 40 minutes. Sophie sat on the lone bench with her feet not reaching the floor and watched her father explain to a man with a radio on his shoulder that he had not stolen anything. They did not get ice cream. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the video from the hardware store jacket had 9,000 views. By 7, it had 200,000, and it had been cut into a version 41 seconds long that began at "Men Like You" and ended at "Sir, are you all right?" and that version was the one that traveled. By midnight, it had 4 million. The bank's communications team drafted 3 statements overnight and issued none of them. At 2 in the morning, a vice president in Boston called Douglas Kane at home to ask in a voice with no professionalism left in it whether he understood that the counterparty on a $750 million mandate had been threatened with removal from a branch lobby by his own guard. Kane said he understood. It took less than a day for the internet to find out who Julian Hayes was. The Boston office had never issued a photograph of him. It did not matter. There was a conference badge from Chicago in a stock photography archive and a state filing with an address on it, and by Friday morning a local affiliate van was parked across from Maple Hollow Elementary with its mast up. Julian saw it from the drop-off line. He did not stop. He drove past the school around the block and the back way by the gymnasium and walked Sophie to the side door with his hand on her shoulder blade, while a man with a camera on his hip called his name twice across the lot. Mrs. Aldridge, who had taught 3rd grade for 22 years and had called him Julian since September, met them at the door and said, "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," in a voice that had gone up half a register and back half a step. Sophie noticed. He watched her notice. By 11, someone had put a link in the school's parent group. By 2, a woman he had spoken to exactly once at a bake sale had texted him to ask whether he might have 20 minutes sometime this week to discuss sponsorship opportunities for the spring fundraiser. He picked Sophie up at 3:15. She got in the car and buckled herself and did not say anything about the character of it. "Marissa said her mom said we're rich," she said finally somewhere on the 2nd mile. "What did you say?" "I said, no, we're not. Our window doesn't go down." She looked out of it the 2/3 it went. "Then Ben said it too. And then at recess nobody wanted to be on my team, but not like not being mean. They just kind of—" She stopped and worked at it and found it. They stood further away. Julian drove. That night, the 2nd video went up. Somebody had found Pamela Cross in a shopping center parking lot on the east side of Ellsworth, sitting in a gray sedan with the door open and her feet on the pavement, and had filmed her for 80 seconds from 30 feet away without her knowing, and in those 80 seconds, she cried in the particular way of a person who is not performing it for anybody. The caption said she lost her job and her career in one morning. Is this justice, or is this a billionaire crushing a woman making $68,000 a year? It had 1 million views before Julian finished the dishes. He read the replies for 10 minutes, standing at the sink with the water off and his hands dry, and then he stopped because he had gotten to the ones about Sophie, about how the little girl in the video would grow up knowing exactly how the world could be made to bend, and he put the phone face down on the counter and left it there. He put her to bed at 8:30, read 2 chapters, and turned off the lamp. At the door, with his hand on the frame, he heard her turn over. "Dad." "Yeah." "That lady at the bank." Sophie's voice came out of the dark very clearly, the way children's voices do when they have been holding a question for 2 days. "She said sorry, and the man in the suit said sorry, and the policeman said sorry. They did, but they only said it after." Julian stood in the doorway. "After what, sweetheart?" "After they found out about your money." There was the sound of a small body sitting up. If you weren't rich, would anybody have said sorry to you? He opened his mouth. He had spoken in front of pension boards. He had talked a fund manager off a ledge in Zurich at 4 in the morning. He had built an answer for every question ever put to him across a table, and he stood in the doorway of a bedroom on Larkin Street and could not find a single true sentence that was also a bearable one. "Go to sleep," he said. He pulled the door most of the way shut and stood in the hallway in the dark for a long time. He had won. The check would be reissued by Monday. The bank was on fire. The woman who had done it had lost everything in a morning. And in 6 years of driving an old car and wearing an old coat and letting an entire town believe he worked with numbers, he had been protecting one thing exactly one, and it had taken 34 minutes in a lobby on Commerce Street to lose it. The attorney came on Saturday morning, which told Julian something before the man had said a word. His name was Robert Vance. He had driven up from Boston in a car that did not belong on Larkin Street, and he stood on the porch in a weekend sweater that had clearly been chosen to look like a weekend sweater. He apologized for the hour said he was outside counsel to Holstead National, and was not there in an adversarial capacity, and Julian let him in and put him at the kitchen table because the kitchen was where Julian had every conversation that mattered. Sophie was already at that table in pajama pants and a sweatshirt, working through a page of long division with her tongue against her back teeth. Vance looked at her and then at Julian and made a small motion with his eyes toward the hallway. "She's fine where she is," Julian said. "Mr. Hayes, some of this is—" "She was there. She's fine where she is." So Vance sat down across from an 8-year-old and opened a folder. He was good at it. He did not begin with money. He began with regret, and somewhere in the middle of it he used the phrase "a catastrophic individual failure" that in no way reflects the institution, which was the first sentence of the morning Julian recognized as load-bearing. Then he turned a page. "The bank would like to resolve this comprehensively and privately. To that end." Another page. First, the servicing mandate proceeds to signature on the original terms Monday if you're willing. Second, a personal settlement in recognition of the distress caused to you and your daughter. He wrote a figure on a legal pad, turned it around, and slid it across the table. Julian looked at it. He did not touch the pad. It was a serious number, not a nuisance number, not an insult, and that was what made it dangerous. Someone in Boston had calculated precisely what it would cost to make a man in a canvas coat feel he had been taken seriously. "And the third thing," Julian said, "a mutual non-disclosure. Neither party discusses Thursday, the settlement, or the personnel matters arising from it. There'd be a joint public statement and the bank would take responsibility in it." "Take responsibility how?" "That an employee failed to follow procedure, that she is no longer with the company, and that the matter has been resolved to the customer's satisfaction." Julian sat with that. Across the table, the pencil had stopped moving. "Let me say your offer back to you," he said. "You pay me a large amount of money. In exchange, the version of that lobby that survives is the one where a bad apple broke a rule, the rule itself was fine, and the man it happened to walked away satisfied." "That's an uncharitable framing." "It's an accurate one." Julian turned his mug a quarter turn on the table. "Mr. Vance, in 19 years, nobody had stopped her. Do you understand what that means? It means either she never did it before Thursday, which neither of us believes, or she did it to people who couldn't do anything about it. Every single one of them went home and told somebody what happened, and nobody with your business card ever drove to their house on a Saturday." Vance started to say something about the record. "I'm not finished. The people she did it to before me had no leverage. I have it, and I have it by accident because a check happened to be large enough that your regional president was in the room. You're asking me to convert that into a wire transfer and sign a document guaranteeing the next person is on their own. The settlement is not intended to—" "It's exactly intended to." Julian looked at him. "That's not an accusation. It's what settlements are for. I've signed 40 of them." The refrigerator cycled on behind them. Sophie had not moved. She was looking at the legal pad with the number on it, and then at her father, and Julian was aware, precisely physically aware, that this was the second time in 3 days that his daughter was going to watch him choose something. The first time, she had watched him give up his name. "No," he said. Vance's expression did not change, which was its own kind of tell. "No to the amount," Julian said, "and no to any amount. Not a dollar of personal settlement, and I won't sign a non-disclosure. Not because I'm punishing anybody and not because I'm holding out, because if I take that money, what happened Thursday becomes a thing that got bought, and I'd have to go on raising a child in a house where that was true." He picked up the pad, tore the top sheet off, folded it once, and handed it back across the table. Tell Boston I want to meet, not lawyers. Kane and whoever above Kane can actually approve policy. I have terms and none of them are for me. When the door had closed and the car that did not belong on Larkin Street had pulled away, Julian came back into the kitchen and found Sophie still sitting there with her pencil sideways in her fingers. You said no to a lot of money, she said. I did. Why, ask me again in about 3 months, Julian said. And I think you'll be able to tell me. He met Pamela Cross the following Tuesday in a conference room at a hotel off the interstate because she would not come to the bank and he would not ask her to. She came in alone in the gray blazer, which Julian thought was either courage or the only thing she owned that was right for a room like that, and she put her hands flat on the table like a woman waiting to be sentenced. By then, the bank had filed what it was required to file, and federal regulators had opened an enforcement action seeking a prohibition order, the kind that bars a person from working at any insured bank in the country permanently. It would take a year or more to conclude, and her own attorney had already told her how it would conclude. None of it was Julian's decision. No committee anywhere had needed his opinion to reach it. The falsified case note had gone where those things go. She was paying a lawyer out of an account that had been intended for a kitchen renovation. They told me you could still sue me personally, Pamela said. Civil, on top of everything. I could. My attorney says you'd win. He's right. She nodded slowly, absorbing what she believed was coming, arranging herself to receive it. I'm not going to, he said. Her head came up. Understand what that is and isn't. Julian kept his voice level. It isn't forgiveness. My daughter flinched at a sound in a room 3 days ago, and I don't know how long that stays in her. And it isn't mercy because you're losing your career regardless, and I'm not the one who took it. You are. Then why? Because she's 8, Julian said. And she is watching me right now more carefully than she has ever watched anything in her life. If I take the last thing you have, your house, whatever's in your retirement, everything, she will learn the exact lesson I have spent 6 years trying to keep her from learning. That the person with the money wins, and that winning means the other person ends up with nothing. That's the sentence you said to me at the counter. Turned around and pointed the other way. I'm not going to hand her that and call it justice. Pamela's hands were shaking on the table. I want to tell you, she said, that I don't know why You know why? I had 19 years. You had a telephone, Julian said, and a number in 90 seconds. Everything else in that lobby came out of the 2 seconds where you looked at my coat and my car and decided. That's the whole thing, Ms. Cross. There isn't a bigger version of it. He stood and picked up his folder. I'll say one more thing and then we're done. I hope you land somewhere. I mean that without warmth. It's just true. The negotiation took 12 days. Julian sat on one side of a table in Boston with 2 of his own attorneys and no interest whatsoever in speed. Douglas Kane sat on the other with a general counsel, a chief risk officer, and a man from the holding company who had flown in and said almost nothing. He did not bring a list. He brought 5 things, each one attached to a moment in a lobby on Commerce Street. And by the third, nobody on the other side of the table was writing quickly anymore. An independent audit of discretionary denials and fraud escalations across every branch by a firm the bank did not choose because in 34 minutes, nobody had picked up a phone to check whether he was who he said he was. A protected channel for employees to escalate over a manager's head with a written ban on retaliation and a named officer responsible for it, because a 24-year-old had been told she'd be written up before lunch for reading her own procedure card out loud. Mandatory annual training for every security officer on the specific question of which instructions they are required to refuse because a man with 2 tours behind him had put his hand out toward a child and had known it was wrong and had done it anyway because someone with a title said the words, Customer rights posted at the entrance of every branch plain language eye level because a room full of people had stood in that lobby and watched, and not one had known enough to say she can't do that. And a fund capitalized by the bank and not by him providing banking access and financial support to single-parent households. It won't carry my name, Julian said. It won't carry the bank's either. I don't want a plaque. I want a program that outlives everybody at this table. The holding company man asked what would happen if they declined. Then I don't sign the mandate, Julian said, and I go on television, and the second one is worse for you than the first. They accepted all of it. Tyler Grant was reinstated with back pay and sat through the first cycle of the new training himself, which he had asked to do. Chloe Bennett was made assistant manager in November, and by January she was running Ellsworth on an acting basis while the region searched for someone permanent, a search everyone, including the region, understood to be a formality. The reissued check had cleared the Monday after. Half went into a trust Sophie would not be told about until she was 18. The other half went where he had said it would go, into the thing whose first line was still written on the back of a grocery receipt in a kitchen drawer on Larkin Street. His own money, his own scholarships, nothing to do with Holstead at all. 3 months later, on a Saturday in January, Julian parked the sedan with the dented quarter panel outside the branch on Commerce Street and walked in with his daughter. There was a placard beside the entrance, now waist-high and unglamorous, listing in 8 plain sentences what a customer is entitled to and who to call when they don't get it. Sophie stopped and read the whole thing on the way past. Tyler was at the door. He held it for the man ahead of them, older, in a work coat gone shiny at the elbows, carrying a paper sack of rolled coins, and said, "Morning, Ray. Cold enough for you?" And Ray laughed and said something about his truck and went to the counter where a teller took the coins without any expression at all. Chloe came out of the office with a nameplate on her lapel and shook Sophie's hand first, which Julian noticed and did not comment on. They had set up a folding table near the brochure rack. There were 9 recipients in that first cycle. The first envelope was for a boy named Wesley Pratt, who was 10, and who came up with his father, a man in a delivery company polo, who kept touching the back of his son's shoulder as though checking he was still there. Julian stayed where he was, 3 steps back. Sophie took the envelope in both hands the way she had practiced at the kitchen table and gave it to Wesley and said, "This is so you can go. That's all it's for." Afterward, in the car with the window that only went down 2/3 of the way, she was quiet for most of a mile. "You know what I figured out?" she said. "Tell me. That day at the bank, everybody got nice to you because of the $5 million. She was looking out the windshield, not at him. "But the money isn't the thing. Anybody can have money. You could have kept it and been rich, and that lady still would have been mean to the next person." Julian drove. "The thing," Sophie said, "is that you used it to hold the door open, like Tyler, except bigger." He did not answer her. There was nothing he could have added that would not have made it smaller. He reached across the console and took her hand and held it and drove them out past the Commerce Street light toward the place on 3rd that sold ice cream even in January, which they had been owed since October and which they finally went and got.